From fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada, this is Pod Therapy. Real people, real problems, and real therapists. You can submit your questions anonymously at podtherapy.net or email us at podtherapyguys@gmail.com. Today on the show, we interview a New York Times best-selling author. Hopefully we can advance our careers without destroying hers. And now, broadcasting from the churn, that guy is Dr. Jim Jobin. I'm Nick Tanchman. It's time for some Pod Therapy.
You know, I still can't believe that the great Lori Gottlieb slummed it up with Pod Therapy.
You know, it's funny because I was thinking, like, I was kind of joking with Laura that, like, you know, you're shameless promoting and pandering to people, and I'm like, this is why he does it because every 1 in 1,000. He'll hit a jackpot, and that's all you got to do. It's a numbers game.
You just got to win enough people.
You just got to win once.
You don't win if you don't play, Tanchman. So it's funny because we did pre-record a taped interview with Lori, which we're going to patch in just a second. But the backstory for how this happened. So Lori Gottlieb is the person who writes for the great magazine The Atlantic, and she writes a column called Ask a Therapist or Dear Therapist. And so on Twitter, The Atlantic would post this and be like, oh, we have a new Dear Therapist column. And I was trolling their account for like months. So like every time I'd see that, the first comment underneath their post would be from Pod Therapy, and it would say, hey, if you like this kind of thing, check out Pod Therapy.
Oh my God, are you serious? That's how that happened?
That's how it happened. But Lori is always tagged in it.
Sorry, Lori.
Yeah, Lori's always tagged in it, and so like she would see that I did that, and one day it started off with me saying like chiming in with unsolicited advice. Like, oh, we answered a question similar to this on this episode, right? And then I'd post a link. Yeah. And so like the people needed that. And so I was doing that for a while, and then Lori started clicking like on the stuff. I finally messaged her. I'm like, hi, I'm that guy that's been badgering you. And then, she had the book coming out, and I was like, would it be cool if we brought you on the show? And she was so gracious, and she was, let's do it.
She's more gracious than she needed to be.
Oh, yeah.
I am so happy I don't know the stuff that you do.
Oh, yeah. Don't ask questions, man. Just see the results. Just show up for the interview. Don't ask how things get made, Tanchman.
Yeah. But her book comes out April 2nd.
Yeah.
For those of you, we talk a little bit about the things going on in this book. So if you're going to listen to this and you haven't read the book, it's going to be a little confusing. Come back to it. Come back to this episode after you've read the book. It is an amazing book. I've been telling everybody that they need to read this. Put this on your reading list.
Yeah.
My sister's probably going to get a copy mailed to her.
Oh, such a good book.
Very good book.
And we did announce it in the interview, but we will make it part of our book club. This is going to be the next book that we read. And we probably will do it a little bit out of order, where maybe we'll record separately and, just kind of bring in our favorite, vignettes or whatever and talk it over. But get the book. It's called Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. Her name is Lori Gottlieb. And so we're going to teleport into the interview with her. But first, I want to make sure that we thank this week's THERAPRODUCERS. So this week's THERAPRODUCER is David Datascoop Villalon. And as is my tradition now, I want to read an excerpt from David's blog. You can go to www.wgdavid.com to read his blog, and here's one. I love these little bits. This one's really good. This morning I received an email that said, "Congratulations, you are one step closer to driving for Uber. For a minute, I thought I had been fired." I love that.
Brilliant.
It is brilliant. And so he is one of our THERAPRODUCERS, and I'll go ahead and read our second. It is Judi Scheider. Judi Scheider from Pod Therapy Pinewood Derby fame. And what you didn't know about Judi Scheider is that she's a Canadian optical physicist and a pioneer in the field of pulse lasers. She was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2018, together with Gerard Moreau, for the invention of chirped pulse amplification. She's a professor at the University of Waterloo. Yeah, and she served as a fellow and vice president of the Optical Society and is currently the chair of the Presidential Advisory Committee.
The physicist part makes sense why her car was so fast.
And really she should have disclosed that, before she did it. And if you know who Judi really is this week, write your answer on the back of a $20 bill. Send it into Pod Therapy.
Thank you, Car Talk, for that idea.
Yeah, gosh. I was explaining there's a buddy of mine who wants to be he's actually studying right now to be a psychiatrist. and he's up in Massachusetts, and he just started listening to the show. And so I said, hey, will you come on the show, and we'll talk to you about being a psychiatrist and stuff. And he's like, yeah, maybe. And so he's like, let me listen to a few episodes first. So he is, and he listened to the one where you're eating Doritos, and he's like, hey, what's the deal with Nick always eating?
One time!
I was like, we're sponsored by Doritos, so that's the deal with that. But,
all right.
Yeah, anyway, but okay, so we're going to jump into the interview, so we're going to roll that out, and you can hear, this is Lori Gottlieb and her new book, Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, which is available for pre-order now, and is also going to be available officially April 2nd. All right, you've seen her on Good Morning America, The Today Show, and CNN. You've read her articles in The Atlantic, Time Magazine, and The Washington Post. After years of climbing the media ladder, our guest today has finally reached the high point of her career by being featured on Pod Therapy, a moment future historians will one day describe as the end of her credibility. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome California therapist and best-selling author Lori Gottlieb. Hi, Lori.
Hi there. It's so nice to be here.
Oh, we're so excited to have you. Thanks for slumming it up with Pod Therapy. And, you had a great career, Lori. You had a really great run, and it's finally come down to this. So you're in California right now. You're in the L.A. area.
I am. I'm in the LA area, and we try not to brag too much about the weather.
Oh, that's okay. You make up for it with your horrendous traffic. We live next door to you in Las Vegas, and there's a reason for that.
Yes.
We don't like your traffic. So you're a practicing therapist in California. Can you tell us a little bit about what your general disciplines or specialities are?
Yeah, so I see people, all the way from their 20s to their 80s, and I see a lot of couples in my practice, but I also see, individuals struggling with everything from depression to relational issues to life transitions, all kinds of what I call the daily problems of living.
Right. And so you're a practicing therapist, and then, just for funsies, you moonlight as a best-selling author and national conference speaker. And so you've now authored some mega hits. You are a New York Times best-selling author, and you've just released your newest book, and that's kind of the occasion that brings us here today. Your newest smash hit, Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. And this book is, I think, one of the most profound things I've ever seen as a therapist reading this book. I was blown away, Nick. That was incredible. Just going through, it's so real. It's like, yeah, this is what it's like to be a therapist.
Yeah, it was a very good book, and I'm very pleased to actually get to talk to the author today. Thank you, Lori.
This is so exciting.
Lori, I have to say, I hope you take this as a compliment, because I absolutely mean it as a compliment. That when reading the book, I actually felt kind of like the way I felt watching Forrest Gump for the first time.
Okay.
Because it was a whole range of emotion.
Yeah.
There were so many parts that I was laughing uncontrollably.
Yes.
There was parts that drove me to tears. There were parts that were just shocking and just kind of, oh my God, that's amazing. Yeah. And it was a really, really good book. So thank you for writing it.
Oh, well, thank you. That's so nice to hear. I mean, I think what I was trying to do with the book was really bring people behind the scenes into the therapy room, kind of to demystify it, to show people what really happens in there. We work alone in a room with people, and nobody sees what we do. And, partly we have case consultation to go over our cases, but sometimes I'll be sitting in the room and something seemingly miraculous happens, and you think, God, I wish other people could see this, because it would give them hope, and you're so moved by your patient, you're so moved by what they're doing, and you're so inspired by them, and you want other people to be inspired by them. So I really wanted to bring people back there and let them see, the whole range of things that happen in a therapy room.
What was really profound about this book that I found just amazing, it's very normal in our profession to go into the book aisle and to walk down self-improvement and things and psychology, and you'll see topical books, right? And so your last book, that was the one about marrying Mr. Good Enough, right?
Well, I didn't pick the title. It's actually a book about how to find a lasting relationship, and and I take issue with the title because it's really a book about how to have really high standards about the things that matter.
Well, that, is an example of a topical book. It encompasses one specific area of psychology and relationships. But this book is these vignettes. And it's interesting because there is a thread, there are common themes, there is a story that unfolds. But each little chapter, they're micro chapters. And so a chapter might last 4 or 5 pages, and it will be sort of this vignette, this quick story about one of the encounters in your therapy office. And I'm just going to ask, that is such a neat idea to kind of bring that forward. Was that different to write for you than sort of a deep dive topically?
Yeah, I wanted to tell these people's stories. We follow 4 main patients in the book, and then we follow me in my own therapy, and then there are other stories of other patients sprinkled throughout. And I really feel like we make sense of our lives through story. Stories help us understand ourselves and our place in the world. And when we talk to friends, we're telling stories. That's how we communicate information about ourselves. And so I really wanted to, I feel like people are getting a lot of information that will be helpful in sort of that self-help way through the book, but I think they're hearing it through stories that will resonate with them.
Yeah, and I definitely feel like you accomplished the mission with demystifying therapy.
Yes.
I think the average listener, and that's kind of our whole goal doing this podcast, why we wanted to start this, is because we felt like there are so many people out there who could benefit from therapy, but were just not willing to do it because they didn't know enough about it. It was kind of a scary idea, concept. With this book, it really kind of lifted the fog a little bit about what therapy is about,
Right.
and that it's nothing really to be afraid of. What, in your opinion, what is it that you feel keeps people from seeking help?
I think a lot of it is shame.
Yeah.
I think that people have a misconception that therapy is for people for whom something is very wrong.
Yes.
And
Right.
it's really not. I talk about, in the book, I talk about the concept of a hierarchy of pain, that,
Yes.
I'm seeing this young woman who's dying of cancer, and then the next session is, but my husband won't initiate sex, and the next session is the babysitter's stealing from me, and,
Yeah.
Right.
and there is no hierarchy of pain. What I came to realize, I think especially as a therapist, is that pain is pain, and usually whatever the situation is, there's something underlying it about how do we love and be loved? What happens when someone betrays our trust? These bigger, deeper questions. And so I think when people think about going to therapy, people might say, well, yeah, I've been, I'm anxious or I'm sad, but I have all these good things in my life. So what do I have to be sad about? Stiff upper lip, They don't really think that therapy is, that they don't need it. But also, I think they feel like there's something stigmatizing about it. So there are both of those things going on, and I think they think that it's a sign maybe of weakness, whereas really it's a sign of strength.
Yes.
I think about how we value emotional health differently from physical health. If you're having chest pain, you're and you're like,
Right.
it's intermittent, it's not really. You're probably at some point going to see a doctor before you have a massive heart attack.
Right.
But I think what people do is they're like, yeah, I'm kind of sad. It kind of comes, it goes, but yeah, it's been there for a while. But what happens is they don't come to therapy until they have the equivalent of an emotional heart attack.
Gosh,
Yes.
that is so well said.
And then it's kind of a much more difficult situation to deal with.
Yeah, they wait until it builds up. And one of the things I think that was so raw and so incredible about this book, it really is real stories. As we're reading this book, it's like, no, this is you're telling the story as it happens. You do have sort of narrative power to sort of thread things, but these are real stories. And in the book, you do say, I've kind of reconstructed these to make sure that I'm being protective of the patient. But at the same time, you're reading real encounters. These humans exist, or these stories are an amalgamation of some of these different sessions we've had. What was that like for you to sort of approach your patients and say, hey, this is the theory I have for this book, and I kind of want to feature some stuff from your life? Was that a weird conversation, and what were some of the responses that you heard?
So in in picking the patients, I deliberately picked people that I'm no longer seeing because I did not feel that there was a way to do therapy and also write about somebody. It felt impossible to me on so many levels. So the other thing is that I was a writer for many years before I became a therapist. And so I've always written about, the culture and psychology and where they intersect. And in my informed consent that I have when new people come to see me, it says very clearly that as long as I do everything to protect their identity, I can write about them.
Oh, wow.
And some people, would choose not to come to me for that reason, and others understand, they've read what I've written and they know that I handle it very carefully.
Wow. Yes. I do all of my therapy in front of a live studio audience. So
Oh, you're Dr. Phil, huh?
Yeah. I have a two-sided mirror and people don't know.
He's using therapy very loosely.
Yeah.
That's very
and the licensing board is listening in.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We've had them on the show. So they're in bed on this. I just have to carry like 10 different malpractice insurances, so that actually answers a lot of questions I had, because I was thinking, gosh, how did this affect the therapeutic rapport? That these stories have sort of been told, but this does make a lot of sense. That was a smart idea to only write about people in past tense.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed, Lori, how, because the other big theme in this book is you going into therapy yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really powerful for the average person to hear, that therapists can go into therapy, and that's nothing to be ashamed of or afraid of, and that and I guess in my own personal story, I went into therapy as well after a painful divorce, and it was incredibly beneficial. And one of the things that I was kind of wondering, I wanted to get your take on, was, for me, my background is in addictions treatment. So that's primarily what I do. So for me, going into therapy, it was easy for me to compartmentalize. And when I went into therapy, I didn't see myself as anything other than just Nick, and I just happened to be a patient. I didn't feel like I was trying to figure out what the therapist was doing, or like, I see what she's trying to do here. Was it like that for you? Were you able to kind of separate that, or did you just feel some crossover?
I think there was some crossover because I was very much like the kinds of people that I see in my practice. And when I did with my therapist everything that people do when they're in therapy, which is, I wanted him to like me, and I wondered when I would see someone in the waiting room when I would be leaving, does he look forward to her sessions more than mine? Is he like falling asleep because I'm telling the same story for the 100th time?
Right.
All of those things that we think. Do I matter? Do I matter to him? And I think we always want to matter to our therapists. And study after study shows that the most important factor in the success of your therapy isn't the therapist's training or years of, how long they've been practicing or what they specialize in, although, of course, all of those things are important, but it's the relationship you have with your therapist.
Yes.
And so I think there was a tendency for me to to want to kind of backseat drive and be like, no, I wouldn't say it that way. And sometimes I learned from him, actually, because I was relatively new at the time, and he was much more experienced than I was, and he would do or say things that I felt were really helpful that I didn't learn in training. And so I was there as a patient, but I also feel like I got some training because I learned from how he was in the room, and I would try to bring my version of that into the room with my own patients as well.
Yes, there was actually a really funny story in there about how one of the techniques, and I'm not going to spoil it, but one of the things that he talks about in your therapy, you then take and apply it to several of your patients, and it seems to work very well, except for one particular patient, which is John, who just does not accept it whatsoever. And I think that's interesting because, we do learn a lot from going through those situations and then try to apply them. And everybody's different. There's not going to be, not every patient that we have is going to respond to every intervention. So I think that was a really good anecdote.
Yeah, I love
that.
Right.
There's not a one size fits all. And John was an especially difficult patient, as you read about in the book, and he was, very kind of narcissistic and insulting to me, and belittled me, and he was very abrasive, and there were a lot of defenses to get past before I could really see who he was. And he, of course, was the patient who rejected the intervention that worked so well with so many other people.
Yes. And while we're on the topic of John, I have to say I related, and this is one of the things that makes the book so amazing, is that I could relate to everybody in that book.
Right.
There were so many times I could relate to you. There were times I could relate to John. There were times I could relate to, Julie's husband. Like, everybody in that book you could relate to on some level. And working with your story about working with John, I could relate to that. I was working in an addictions treatment program for folks, for men who were leaving prison. It was a reentry program. And there was one client, and he reminded me so much of John. And the sessions were almost verbally abusive to me, the way that he would talk to me. And I remember staffing this case with my supervisor and explaining to her everything that's going on. And I was convinced that she was going to say, yeah, in those sessions, you shouldn't have to deal with that.
That's too much.
And she didn't do that. And she's like, no, she's like, stick with it. You have to figure out what's going on.
Right.
And it was so frustrating, but it really paid off in the end. And we made some amazing progress. And I want to ask you, having gone through that with John, how were you able to stay focused and not take things personally?
Right. So John starts off by telling me that he's going to pay me in cash at the end of each session because he doesn't want his wife to know that he's in therapy, and he doesn't want a record of it.
Yeah,
and,
I've had a lot of this.
and then he says, You'll be like my mistress. Well, actually, no, I wouldn't pick someone like you as my mistress. More like my hooker.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean, he says, as if I know what that means.
Right.
And he's very, very offensive. And he's like, I'll just come in here each week and, dump all my problems on you and leave. And isn't that funny? Yeah, super funny. So, you start off with someone like that and you say, yeah, I don't think I really want to sit in a room with this person for 50 minutes each week. But what happens is you have to realize, I think we all realize as therapists, that people behave in a way because it protects them. It keeps them safe. And one thing that was very clear about John, despite he was this hugely successful Hollywood writer-producer, and he was a guy who was so in command of his life in other ways, but just so lost as interpersonally. And you have to get to sort of what's underneath that. And, I think when you really it takes a while, I think, for people to tell their stories, for you to hear their stories. So many times there are secrets that people aren't revealing. I do that with Wendell, with my own therapist in the book, where it takes me a long time before I really reveal what's going on.
Yeah.
Not because I'm necessarily consciously hiding it, but because I rationalize to myself that, it's not really that important. We're really here to talk about the other thing. And I think there are lots of, there are different kinds of secrets. There are the secrets that we keep from the world. There are secrets that we keep from the people really close to us. There are secrets that we keep from our therapists. And then there are secrets that we keep from ourselves. And I think that the secrets we keep from ourselves are the ones that really don't come out for a long time in therapy, and that's sort of where the John story went, and where my story went with my own therapist. And I think that you have to stick with it in order to let people take the time. Obviously you're guiding them, and you don't, you want to help focus them so that we get to the story quicker, but you also have to let people tell their stories in a way that they're going to. If you go in there too quickly, their defenses are going to get even more impenetrable, and then you have something else, another layer to get through that you didn't have originally. So timing is really important.
Yeah, definitely. And we have a lot of listeners that are kind of new to the therapy field, and we've got some who are students in college still working on their degree. And I think this is a really good example with John of how John was dropping so many little hints along the way about what was going on, that I think if you took things personally and you brought it back onto yourself, you would have and any therapist would have completely missed those. But your ability to just continue searching, like, it kind of made you, aware of, like, wait, who's Gabe?
Yeah.
I think in that situation, like, I know myself in that situation, that's a question I wouldn't have caught in the moment. It would have been late at night, when I'm having dinner, I've been like, wait a minute, did I hear him say that right?
But even if you don't get it in the moment, because we all, miss things in the moment, I think that, sometimes I'll be writing a chart note and I'll think, oh, I want to bring that up next week. You can always bring it back. And I think that's what's nice about therapy is that you get another opportunity next week. So you don't have to get it all right that one session, that there are many opportunities in the relationship to revisit things, to bring them back, to say, hey, I was thinking about this thing that we said last week.
Right.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, as Nick said, a lot of our audience is actually psychology students, aspiring clinicians. And honestly, my takeaway from the book was I was thinking this needs to be a standard read. Like, this needs to be a textbook in every graduate program that is assigned, and they should just have to do a report on this and just as part of basic training. But, Lori, with your career, it is an unusual one in the sense that you not only are still a practitioner, but that you've got this national voice. And, you do write the Ask a Therapist column for The Atlantic, a very major publication. You've got these smash hit books. You speak at all these conferences. And I'm curious, on a professional level, and for the future professionals who listen to the show, what has it been like for you to transition from this profession that is often so private and so secluded that we only see one person at a time, and if we even see another colleague, it's like in the hallway as we're walking to the bathroom in between sessions, to now being in such a public spotlight and being asked to comment and give advice in a very public way, and being scrutinized, I imagine, by people who say, well, I don't agree with her advice, or she doesn't know, or she's a quack, or something unkind. What has this been like for you to transition from such a private role into this public-facing role?
I wrote a piece about this for the New York Times Magazine a few years ago. It was called What Brand is Your Therapist? And it was about how, as therapists, we like the solitary aspect, I think, of the job. I don't mean we like being alone, but I mean, I think we like the space to think. We've chosen a profession where we're sitting in a room in a very private space for most of our day. And what is it like then when all of a sudden it seems like people need to market themselves? I think a lot of us don't think about, what it means to run a practice, what it means to run a business, essentially. And so I think that relates to your question because I'm really an introvert. And before I was a therapist, as I said, I was a writer for many years. And writers are introverts too. And so, I like being alone at my laptop and writing.
Right.
Or I like, one-on-one conversations or small dinner parties. I'm not someone who likes to be, front and center in that way. I think as a writer, I had to get used to being in the media and having that reach. And I think the reason that I do it as a therapist is because we can only reach one person at a time in the therapy room. But when you write something, like maybe you should talk to someone or the Dear Therapist column that I write, you can reach lots of people. And I really feel like one thing that we all have in common as therapists is we really want to help people. We really want to change people's lives. And as a journalist, I was telling the stories that I thought people would relate to that maybe would help change people's lives. But as a therapist, you're actually helping people to change their lives in a more direct way.
Right.
And then if you can write about it, then you can help lots of people change their lives.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I like that.
Yeah, and I mean, has there been any blowback as you've sort of stepped into the national spotlight? I know that we've been hosting this podcast now weekly for a little over a year, and we take listener questions and we just do some advice and some feedback and just, again, try to help people kind of be introduced to the idea of therapists and kind of make it so that it's not so mystic anymore and we seem more approachable. But even in our, small scope, sure, we get some negativity and some blowback and people that are really unsatisfied with an answer or feel that, we didn't have a complete thought. And I can only imagine on your stage, for the Atlantic and being out there in the open and showing up in so many different spheres, have you experienced any kind of like negativity and how have you sort of overcome that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very hard not to experience that. I think that there's a lack of respectful discourse in the way that people share their feedback. So I'm very open to the feedback. For example, if I write an answer in the Dear Therapist column and somebody has a comment about it, I will miss things, or I didn't think to bring up a certain point. I love that kind of feedback. That's really helpful to me. But someone writing in, "You're an idiot. You should never have gotten a license."
Right.
That's not that helpful.
Right.
Because I'm not really going to hear their feedback in that context.
Exactly.
If I hear, if someone writes in and says, "Hey, I read your column. Here's what I thought. Here's what I might have said," that's very helpful for me because next time I will think about that when I'm writing a column. I can help somebody better that way. And I think we all improve by hearing constructive feedback.
Yeah.
So, yes, there are a lot of people who, say things like, they'll post things like, "Can you believe this person's a therapist?"
Oh,
To which I think, well, sometimes I wonder the same thing. We all have those moments where we're sitting in a therapy room and we think, wait, someone gave me a license to do this? I'm really lost at this moment.
Yeah.
That's whenever you bite the back of the pencil and you nod pensively. That's, that's all
Yeah,
you do.
well, that's when you think to yourself, like, when's my consultation group? How many days do I have?
Yeah.
Or who's going to be in the kitchen at the break?
Yeah,
Run this
yeah.
by them.
Drive-by consultation.
But I think that I think the other part of being out there is that lots of people will say, "I really related to that. I thought I was alone. I thought I was the only one who went through that. I was afraid to bring this up to anyone, and I was so glad to see that letter or the early feedback to maybe you should talk to someone. I saw myself in this person or that person, and that was really helpful, and I think I might go to therapy."
Right,
Yeah.
so the good outweighs the bad, and that kind of fuels you. Another question I had is, are you still doing your private practice? Do you still see patients?
Yes.
So, again, my world being a microcosm of your world, I experience that reality where people have heard my podcast, and then they come in, and now they're my patient. And it's kind of odd to me because they know a lot about me, because they've heard me talk a lot about myself, and we're pretty candid on our show. I reveal that I have generalized anxiety disorder and some of my past stuff. And so then my patient, who I normally wouldn't disclose that to unless it was, really appropriate, now has all this information about me, and I have to kind of weigh that in. Have you had that happen, and what's it been like for you when new people come find you and they go, "Listen, I've encountered your whole body of work here, and in your newest book, maybe you should talk to somebody you talk a lot about being in therapy. You reveal a lot, even through the lens of your vignettes. When you tell a story about a patient, you'll say, "And I related to her. That was me when I was 21," and there are patients that see you now, it's very possible that they know quite a bit about you. How has that played into what you're doing?
I think there are two sides to that. I think that, I talk about in the book that I had a colleague who, when she and her husband were trying to have a baby, and she was pregnant, and she was standing in a Starbucks when she got the call from her doctor that her pregnancy wasn't viable. And she burst into tears, like in the Starbucks, because they had been through so much, and they really thought this pregnancy was progressing and was going to, give them a baby. And at that moment, she didn't realize that one of her patients was in the Starbucks and had walked in and saw her and left and never came back to therapy. And I think that, it's kind of like when you're a kid and you think that your teachers sleep in the classroom and you don't realize that they have a life outside and that they're real people.
Right.
I think that some people would prefer it if their therapist just kind of slept on the couch in their office and didn't have a life.
Right.
And you didn't sort of run into them at Best Buy with their families and see another side of them. But I think that it's our humanity that allows us to help them. I say in the book that I'm a card-carrying member of the human race. That's I know what it's like to be a person in the world. And while I wouldn't want my therapist to take that phone call about her baby not being viable in my session, which of course she didn't, if I saw her cry in the Starbucks, I would think I would trust her more. I would feel safer with her because she knows what it's like to be a person, and she had the normal reaction that people have to that, which is it's painful. And so because she knows what that's like, even though my struggles are different, I would trust her more to understand my own pain and my own struggles. Nobody wants to go and talk to a brick wall.
Right.
Nobody wants to go to a therapist who doesn't have an inner life, because how can they really help you? So I think there are these two tropes of the therapist in the culture. There's like, the therapist who's very removed and Freudian and, whatever,
right.
and who Freud actually wasn't that way, but somehow people attribute that to him. And then there's like the trope of the therapist as a hot mess, who's like completely falling apart and they just, can't function in life. And I think that neither of them is really accurate. I think most therapists are just regular people who go through the soap opera of life. And that's a good thing, because you don't want a robot trying to help you with what is essentially the human condition.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. I think the book does a really good job, I feel, of showing kind of the human side of the therapist, and you going into therapy and how that actually benefited not only you, but in turn benefited your patients.
Yes.
And how by you dealing with all of this, it became enlightened, a lot of enlightenment. There's a lot more, it seems, self-awareness on your part, and how that transferred into your care for your patients.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. It's like we hold up a mirror to our patients so that they can see a reflection of the patterns that they're engaged in, the ways they might be shooting themselves in the foot without even realizing
right.
it, and, finding themselves in the same place over and over. And our therapist holds up a mirror to us, but our patients also hold up a mirror to us. In their struggle, sometimes we will see something about ourselves that we hadn't seen before. And we're not going to talk about that in the session, but it certainly helps us to be more effective in the room with them.
Right. One other thing that I thought that you did a really good job of illustrating in the book was this idea that oftentimes what the patient identifies as the presenting problem, once they get in there, turns out that's not even really the biggest issue.
Right.
And that's kind of how it was for me when I went into therapy. The thing that I went in there to talk about, we ended up like not even talking about it, because we get into it and we're like, yeah, you know what? That's not even why I'm here.
Yeah. I'm here for something way deeper than that.
Yeah. And it was really good.
I'm always curious about why somebody came in, not just why are you here, but why now?
Yes.
Why this day, this week, this month did you decide to pick up the phone and, come into my office? And I think that that's a really important question, because often the presenting problem, as you said, is a red herring. It's kind of like the thing that got them in there, but something else had been percolating beneath the surface for a while. And so this one thing that they came to talk about might just be sort of the breaking point, that got them in there. But really, if they want longer lasting change and more significant change, they're going to talk about sort of how they ended up here and the why now of it.
Yes, definitely.
And a second ago you said something which I really, really liked. You talked about the tropes, right? And there's these stereotypes in popular culture about our profession and what we do. And it seems like every time I see a therapist somehow showing up in a story, it's what you said. We're either really boring and it's just you're playing the backdrop and it's nothingness, you're just being aloof, or you're a train wreck. And so, like, I've seen that. There's that show Casual where she's a therapist and her life's falling apart and she's like a problem drinker and stuff. There's that movie Shrink with Kevin Spacey. It just, every time that character shows up, it's always something interesting. But I feel like we're at a turning point in American history where our profession is finally starting to receive a lot of attention, and especially with sort of the mental health epidemics that have been sweeping the nation, the opioid crisis, depression, suicide now a leading cause of death. People like you are finally getting, an ample amount of attention, and people are kind of bringing you forward and saying, let's have this national conversation. And Laura, you're killing it. And so, my question to you is, when are you going to start your primetime day TV show following Ellen?
Yeah, that's not really in the works. although the book has been, Eva Longoria has optioned it for television.
Wow.
That's awesome. That is amazing.
But I really
awesome.
hope that it will, and one of the things that I really trust about the group of people that we're working with is that they're not going to portray the therapist as a train wreck. That I think people will finally see, oh, this is a therapist's life, but a life like anyone can relate to. And so it doesn't have to be a train wreck to be interesting.
Yes, very true.
Well said.
Well, one last question I have for you, Lori. We kind of you talked in the book a little bit about the future of therapy, as far as like the online therapy that's going on, which I think you had the best description ever of online therapy, which is therapy with a condom on, which I absolutely love.
I have to attribute that to my colleagues.
So you kind of talk in there about how we're moving at the speed of want, and as we have, this need for immediate results, what do you see as being the future of therapy?
Yeah, I don't think that therapy in the traditional sense will go away, meaning that rare experience of sitting face-to-face with someone for 50 minutes where you can see them, where you hear each other breathe, where you, there are no screens involved, nothing's going to ping or distract you or disrupt the conversation. That's so rare. And you can see when people come in, their heart rates go down.
Yes.
Yeah.
They can breathe. There's more space. They can hear themselves think. They can access their feelings. It's very different from the world in which we live today. And I don't think that people are going to stop wanting that. So yes, there are all these technological ways of doing therapy. Text therapy, some people even do. But there's, even when I talk about Skype therapy as therapy with a condom on, it really is because you don't have the vibe, the energy inside that room where you're both sharing the same space.
Right.
And I think that as humans, to our detriment, we don't get enough of that in our day-to-day lives. And when people really need human connection, which is when they're in crisis or when they're struggling with something, is when you really need human connection, I think they're still going to want a human connection face-to-face in a room with nothing getting in the way.
Wow.
Yeah,
incredible. Yeah, no, and so, for everybody that's listening to our show, we want to make sure that they can get a hold of this incredible book. It is titled Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, and we are here doing an interview with the author Lori, Lori, Gottlieb, Gottlieb, and the book is now available for pre-sale everywhere you can get them. There will be a link in our description. You can click the link and go right there, and we want everybody to order this book. I think that we're going to make it a book club book for our show. We have a special book club that we do for our patron members, and so we'll do this one because this is the perfect book for therapists to read, for professionals to read, for anybody who's interested in therapy. If you are a person who might ever go to therapy, if you're a mental health advocate, or if you're a card-carrying member of the human species, this book is about humanity, and it's about stories, and it is a backdrop of therapy to reveal truth inside of real people's real lives, and with a special sort of extra window of insight into the author and her human experience. And so you can also follow Lori on Twitter. And so, Lori, I want to make sure that I'm getting this right, but I've got you at Lori Gottlieb 1. Isn't that right?
That's right, yep.
The number 1. And then your website is your name, lorigottlieb.com, correct?
Yes.
Great. And then, I want to make sure that we're plugging everything we can. And then, of course, The Atlantic. The Atlantic is this little magazine nobody's ever heard of. But, worth a Google. Worth a Google.
I tried.
One day you're going to make it, Lori. One day you're going to make it. You just hang in there. One day you're really going to break through. But, Lori, it's just been such an incredible encounter with you, and we want to point everybody toward your book, Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. Lori Gottlieb, amazing author, conference speaker, article enthusiast, journalist, and therapist in our neighboring state of California. Lori, thank you so much for coming on Pod Therapy. Thank you for putting up with us for this time. And, man, we're really excited for you. Is there anything else that we should know about your launch? Are you going to be doing a book tour or anything exciting coming up?
I'm about to leave for book tour, and my book tour schedule is on my website if you go to speaking and then click on events. I will be in many, many cities, and I will be doing events with Katie Couric and Scott Simon from NPR, and this week I'll be doing Livewire with Luke Burbank up in Portland. I'll be in Chicago. I'll be in. Well, you can see everything on the website.
Wow, this is going to be so much fun. If you come to Las Vegas, just so you know, we're going to come bug you.
Yeah. No. I love your podcast, and it was such a thrill to have this conversation with you guys.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lori. Thanks for coming on the show, and we can't wait to have all of our listeners read the book and talk it over with them.
A huge fan, and I really appreciate your having me on.
Well, you're very generous, Lori. Congratulations on all your success. I cannot wait to watch this book shine. You're doing a great job.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. Take care. Have a good weekend.
Lori, take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, we are back. Thank you again to Lori for joining us today.
Thanks
was
for putting up with us.
An amazing interview.
It was.
I'm so happy that we didn't come off as idiots or too bad.
Well, or that she didn't point it out.
Yeah, she was nice enough not to point it out.
She was gracious. She's like, that was nice.
I
think it was her way of saying, God bless you. You know, you guys just keep on trying.
That's cute.
That's cute.
You guys are cute.
You guys have like a little radio show. That's cute that you guys get to do it. But thank you so much, Lori, for coming on the show. That was awesome.
So it's time for our apologies, Patreons, reviews, and announcements.
Yes, it is.
Take it away, Jim.
I have an apology. So the last episode, it was my job to edit it and post it. I did not, and then Nick texted me. He's like, "Hey, where the hell's the episode?" And it was way late, and I was back-to-back booked. So Nick saved the day. So tip of the cap to Nick, who saved it, and it was excellently done this time. No errors. It was well done. So tip of the cap.
I typically will make a mistake once, and I learn from it.
Yeah, and I told
don't
yes,
do it again.
yes. So. This is the point. I was telling the listeners because they were like, "You're mean to Nick when he screws up." I'm like, "No, if you kick him in the balls hard enough, he'll never do it again." You gotta do this. So yeah, I feel like I contributed to your success. Good job.
Yeah. I love how your apology somehow came back to you congratulating yourself.
Yeah, it did. It did.
That is a talent.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing?
I'm sorry that I'm so awesome.
I almost didn't even catch it. It was so smooth.
When do we have Jim's mom on to figure out where all this self-confidence came
Clarify
from?
all this stuff. I think the word you're looking for is delusion. I think that's the one. So other announcements, we are getting to the end of this month. We're going to be turning into April. And then after April, of course, is May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month. People have been sending us suggestions of other podcasts and organizations that we might reach out to just to do some partnership. And so there's actually some really big podcasts that have invited us to collaborate with them. So we're super excited for that. And our goal is obviously just to, get mental health out there and make sure that people understand that it's okay to see somebody and what to do if they need some help. So help us do that. If you have any suggestions, make sure you send it into the show. But we also want to thank our Patreons. And so we actually have a new THERAPAL that we need to acknowledge. Welcome to the TheraParty, JD Scoop. We love you, dude, or lass, or whatever. Dudette. Is that what I should say?
Sure.
Yeah.
And we want to especially thank our bosses, the Elite 8 or 9, the mysterious and shrouded Illuminati members of our fan club, the THERAPRODUCERS. Thank you, Smitty Scoop, Jake Schneider, Robert Brownie Jr. Mint, Kayla Lansbury, David Datascoop Villalon, Judi Schneider, Nathan's Hot Dog Scoop, Dr. Ben Don, and ex officio board member Ellie O'Dare.
Just pulled up a chair and said, hell with this, I'm showing up. If you'd like to hear this episode uncut, which I highly recommend because this episode is unlike any other, there was a lot of weird mixer-do's and the whole thing is definitely edited differently. So if you want to hear the uncut episode, jump over to patreon.com/therapy. We also do some other side projects there, which more will be rolled out here in the spring. But check out patreon.com/therapy and sign up. And thank you, everybody, for supporting mental health. That's all the time that we have for this week's session. We want to thank our landlords, the Ice Cream Social Podcast, and thanks to our special guest, Lori Gottlieb, for contributing to our show today. We really appreciate it. Remember, pod therapy isn't something you should keep all to yourself. Help us reach others by opening this episode's description in your podcast app and copying and pasting the link provided into your social media. Don't forget, you can find us at facebook.com/podtherapy, on Twitter @PodTherapyGuys, and now at patreon.com/therapy.
Do you want to submit a question to the show? Ask anonymously at podtherapy.net or email us at podtherapyguys@gmail.com. I'm Nick Tansman.
I'm Jim Jobin.
Thanks, and we'll see you for your appointment next week.
Great show, everybody. Great show. We did it.
We did it.
We done did the damn thing. All right, you can hit record now.
Rehearsal over.
Great job, guys. I think the real deal is going to be excellent.
Yeah, you guys are going to crush this.
All right, call her back. All right, no questions.